now let's go to the last speaker of today, who is Thomas Brendorfer from Canada and the NARDAC representative to the RDA Steering Committee. Thomas, when you want, thank you for waiting.
Thank you. I'll share the screen. I'll turn off the video because this is coming from Canada. And I think that's the right button. Okay. Start from the beginning. Okay, I'm seeing it full screen. I hope everyone else is.
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. And hello, everyone. I will be providing a variety of details about my activities on the RSC recently, and as well, I will cover some activities overall that have been occurring in the North American community. I will also go over community resources, covering some of the same material from my last presentation to URIC. So part of this will be a refresher, but I will highlight a few new things. For NARDAC, community resources are of interest because this is an area that looks like it will require new cross-regional collaboration efforts in order for this to come about. So a little bit more about me. I am coming from Canada, calling in from Canada. That's where I am right now. I am the North American RDA Committee representative to the RSC, and I'm also the... I hear an echo. Okay. I'm also the Canadian Committee on Cataloging representative to NARDAC. I'm the author of RDA Essentials. In the past year, I've been helping with a 3R training task group created by the Program for Cooperative Cataloging. It's a standing committee on training for monographs. Currently, we're working on phase 1, introductory training. And this introductory material is not dependent on policy statements. And our goal is to have this done by the end of this year. So the charge for this committee is to develop a training curriculum for PCC participants to catalog print and electronic book monographs using the revised RDA toolkit, LC-PCC application profile, LC-PCC policy statements, and LC-PCC workflow documents. NARDAC recently recorded a virtual event on August 30th, which is now available on YouTube. Normally, this event is done in tandem with the American Library Association's annual conference, but this is now the third virtual NARDAC forum we have done. One benefit to doing this is that while the typical in-person event was usually about an hour long, we've utilized 2 hours to allow for more speakers and more questions. And also there tends to be a larger audience. So in my part in this event, I went over the recent RSC decisions on derivative expressions, and I provided an introduction to the proposal on collection models. On the collections model. As you can see, the makeup of NARDAC is listed here. There are 2 representatives from the American Library Association, 2 from the Canadian Committee on Cataloging, including 1 that's required to be from Library and Archives Canada, and 2 representatives from the Library of Congress. I'll also mention that since my term ends at the end of this year, perhaps one of these people will become the new RSC rep, starting in January. In terms of some of my activities, I have been involved in the last few months with a new group that was formed at the RSC level, and that's the assessment group. And its goal is to look at feedback that comes in, most of it from the toolkit feedback form. And the issue there is because some of the feedback was complex, it was thought that there should be a group consisting of the RSC secretary and RSC regional representatives to have a look at this feedback and come to some initial determination to analyze it and to see what action needs to be taken, who it should go to, as well as to determine if the change cannot be accommodated in base RDA. And just a couple of examples that came out of that. there was a question about tidying the minimum description language, and the assessment group discovered there were two ways in the toolkit of presenting this information. So a fast track was compiled to merge the two ways of presenting a minimum description. And so that went up to the RSC recently. And so the decision was made to go ahead with essentially using this kind of structure to describe a minimum description, where the first part is the requirement for an appellation element for the entity being described. And the second part is the, in this case for an item, the other entity involved, the manifestation exemplified, which can have a choice of values in terms of an appellation element or an IRI. Among the other issues that were looked at, there was a question that came in feedback about having additional breakdowns of place of residence, because the scope note got into place of work and place of study. This was carried over from the old toolkit, where place of residence, comma, etc., covered a lot of other places other than just place of residence. So the decision was made to remove the scope note and to leave it open such that the broader related place of person could be used, or new, more specific elements such as place of work and place of study can be proposed. More recently, the RSC took some input from the assessment group on revising the language around the principle of uniformity, and that there's still ongoing discussion about that. It was brought forward that under internationalization, and perhaps this is of interest to this audience here at URIC, there's new language there that in some ways tempers what we mean by uniformity. Would you consider uniformity apply the same standard for display purposes, for example? But in the context of the internationalization objective, it states, given the flexibility of the guidance and recording methods, the metadata provided by different agents will not necessarily be identical, but as well-formed data, it will be understood by any agent when shared. The emphasis is on data harmonization rather than strict compatibility. So this is a topic of ongoing discussion, is to see what revisions can be made to the principles and objective in light of this new understanding, particularly coming out of the context of internationalization. So I'll move on to talking about community resources. This is what has been accomplished so far. Back last year in September, content from the appendices had been moved over to the community resources, such as abbreviations and capitalization instructions. In April, the set of special instructions for access points for legal works, musical works, etc. These have been parked in a place called pseudo elements in the new toolkit, and instead of adding them to the authorized access point for work element page, these were moved to the community resources. And the other logic there is that essentially they deal with string encoding schemes for the construction of access points, which is really the home now. Community resources is really the home now for those kinds of instructions. In July, there was some additional content moved over, some more string encoding schemes from other elements, not just access points. And that effort is ongoing, and NARDAC is actually helping with that and looking at some other places where there is current string encoding scheme and instructions in base RDA, and where the goal is to move that either into community resources, or perhaps some of those would be covered by policy statements. So just a bit of history again. This is where all of this came from originally, the AACR2 appendices. And in the original toolkit, it was structured around these appendices. And you'll see there were some things that were elevated here, dates in the Christian calendar, record syntaxes, which in the new toolkit, we would say are part of string encoding schemes for structured descriptions. When we looked under the headings in the original toolkit, a pattern emerged. Many subtopics appeared, but it became clear that these are under the English language. And as we browse down these lists, we eventually encounter the bottom there, headings for other languages and scripts. And so here's an expansion of those other languages covered, seen here under the topic of capitalization and names of persons. And even under point F11, under names of persons, surnames with articles, etc., it's broken down yet again into different languages underneath that heading. In the new RDA toolkit, the content from the appendices is found under the Resources tab, most of it under the menu heading Community Resources. And there's a sub-menu for Community Refinements and one for Community Vocabularies. So, and so this is a key separation here. And so there is base RDA, which consists of the guidance and entity and element pages. And then there is community resources, which reflect conventions that are specific to specific communities. So if we click on community resources, we see a note saying this content is specific to language or specialist communities rather than international in scope. If we look at community refinements with the July updates to the new to the toolkit, this has been reorganized a bit further, and we can see some new headings that were added there. So let's look at say manifestation refinements. We can see string encoding schemes that were found in the elements for manifestation have been moved here. So maybe take a look at series statement. So we can see that the formulation of a series statement is the result of applying a string encoding scheme. So it's in this case, it means the selection of the elements, the order, and also their punctuation. And just moving across and just taking a look at another one, publication statement is a string encoding scheme that's moved here into these community refinements. So stepping back out, and we can look at the other link under community resources as community vocabularies. And just note again, these are not to be maintained as part of RDA in the future, but they are of ongoing interest and pertinent to RDA toolkit user communities. So if we look at terms in specific languages, we see the list of languages as a primary way that this has been reorganized. English is now just one language among many. So to get to that organization, the process that went into that involved breaking out under each language and script what topics were covered, such as capitalization, initial articles, and so on. So this is just a sample of that analysis, and that led into the new organization. If we look at terms in English, we can see how this is organized by RDA entity and then by element involved. And if we take a peek at one of the entities, we can see instructions that are applicable broadly to multiple RDA entities. In this case, the instructions around initial articles. If we move sideways and look at another language, we see it's similar elements, not necessarily identical, a set of elements that are covered here, but the overall organization is the same. First of all, looking at instructions that are applicable to all RDA entities, then the resource entities, agent entities, place, and then time spanned. And again, if we look in depth at one of them, we'll see the parallel set of instructions for initial articles as they are applicable to a range of RDA entities as covered under French. So the highlight, just how far things have gone. So from taking just a look at a particular example, ACR2 had a heading for a topic under the appendix for capitalization. In this case, the English language is the context for this. In the new toolkit, it's formulated under the new organization, so the entity and the language, and in this case, referring broadly to manifestation statements. You notice one thing that's missing are the examples. So this is a duty that will likely fall to communities as they take control over this content and decide to add and update it. A question that has come up in the past is just what content can be put into community resources. So the first few are actually there already. Normalizing data instructions such as capitalization in more detail, specific to a language group or another community. Certainly access point construction, a range of community vocabularies are found there. And there's also been thought about community extensions to other elements such as carrier and content types, additional subtypes, and then some other discussion around perhaps application profiles and a place for alternate labels for elements. So where do we stand today with community resources? So the conventions we had in the appendices generally reflected what the Anglo-American community had decided for itself. It is possible that the language communities otherwise covered in the appendices may have continued to develop their conventions and perhaps have diverged. So it is even possible within a single language community to have two different spellings for a term, such as illustrated by the letter U in the word cataloging. So community resources have content. So now what? So the thought is, the goal is to have, by the end of this year, to hand over ownership to other groups. So for the English language content, which is a lot of the content there, and this is where NARDAC has to decide how to approach this, and in particular how we will engage with the other regional groups in terms of making sure this content is maintained and updated. I also understand that the Finns do plan to translate the current English text of the community resources and to take over that translated content for themselves. So basically, communities implementing community resources need to figure out how this part of the RDA toolkit works for them in concert with base RDA, policy statements, application profiles, etc. There's a need to commit to regular review and revision, and also need to ensure the content remains compatible with RDA. And then there's also the issue of updating the content management system, the technical requirements for that, or how assistance will be provided for communities to add their content. And so I've come to the end. I can't see the chat. Let me just see. I need to stop sharing.
Thank you, Thomas.
Okay.